Great to have you back in the family.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Laura. We begin tonight with a Fox News alert. A top Canadian official is cutting her European trips short, heading here to Washington as early as tomorrow. As the president says NAFTA is out, the U.S.-Mexico trade agreement is in. A live report in just minutes, and then Senator John Thune is here to weigh in. Plus, in honor of Senator John McCain's life, President Trump orders flags at half staff after flags at the White House started the day at full staff. Tonight, the president makes his first public comments on McCain's passing. We've got those for you. Those comments came, by the way, at a huge state-like dinner for evangelical leaders. Pastor Robert Jeffress was there. He will join us live tonight with the Inside Scoop. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. We begin tonight with the life and legacy of Arizona Senator John McCain. Today, senators from both sides of the aisle are honoring one of their own. Correspondent Kristen Fisher is tracking all the reaction. She's got the latest. Kristen.
Well, Shannon, Senator McCain will be back inside the building that he loved so much, the U.S. Capitol, on Friday. He'll become the 31st person to ever lie in state in the Capitol's rotunda. It's one of the greatest honors available to an American statesman, but his colleagues in the Senate, they couldn't wait until then to begin the process of finding the words to explain what he meant to them and what he meant to his country.
Bring solace to the multitudes who mourn his death.
As the Senate convened for the first time since Senator John McCain's death, his colleagues on both sides of the aisle paid tribute to a senator known as the Maverick for his devotion to the core American principles as he saw them over party politics.
The Senate won't be the same without John McCain. I think it's fair to say the passion that John brought to his work was unsurpassed in this body.
He was unafraid to take on presidents. He was unafraid to take on his own party. He was equally parts funny and furious, foul-mouthed and statesmanlike.
On Saturday, he'll be eulogized by two former rivals and presidents, George W. Bush and Barack Obama, at the National Cathedral. But just a few miles away, the current inhabitant of the White House will not even be there. The feud between President Trump and the late senator lives on, even in death. Fox has confirmed that over the weekend, President Trump went against the wishes of his chief of staff and press secretary by refusing to allow the White House to release a statement calling McCain an American hero. Then this morning, another slight. The White House returned its flags to full staff. That prompted an outcry from several veterans groups and from the Senate floor.
Anybody who, in any way, tarnishes the reputation of John McCain deserves a whipping. So I would say to the president or anybody in the world, it's time to pause and say this was a great man. He gave everything for us. We owe him nothing less than the respect that he earned.
By mid-afternoon, the president reversed course, issuing a statement returning the White House flag to half staff. Then, just a few hours ago, he said this at a dinner for evangelical leaders.
Also, our hearts and prayers are going to the family of Senator John McCain. There will be a lot of activity over the next number of days, and we very much appreciate everything that Senator McCain has done for our country. So, thank you very much.
Senator McCain had his own message, a final farewell read by his former presidential campaign manager.
We weaken our greatness when we confuse our patriotism with tribal rivalries that have sown resentment and hatred and violence in all the corners of the globe. We weaken it when we hide behind walls rather than tear them down.
Well, after public memorial services in Arizona and here in Washington, Senator McCain will be laid to rest on Sunday in a private service at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. Shannon.
All right, Kristen, thank you very much. And there have been a lot of questions about what comes next. Who could fill that seat? We're going to talk to Peter Doocy about that coming up. Thank you. Well, the president and his advisors are calling it a big deal in the making, and given his focus on our border with Mexico, it's all the more remarkable tonight that country's leadership is saying it's almost time for a tequila toast with President Trump over a brand new trade deal. Fox Business Network's Edward Lawrence has been at the trade representative's office all day. You've been covering the ins and outs of this whole NAFTA thing for us, and today some news.
Yeah, 5 weeks, and this news moved the markets to record highs, and the deal between the U.S. and Mexico can stand on its own, according to the Mexican Mexican delegation, but there's some elements that Canada could sign on to, and those are considered proposals. Now, right after the president said that this agreement would be called the United States-Mexico Trade Agreement, we're told that the White House advisor Jared Kushner got a call from the Canadian Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland asking to talk. The Canadians will be in Washington tomorrow. They are on the clock. Now, Friday, the U.S. Trade Representative will send a letter to Congress notifying them of the agreement. Canada has until then to be a part of the original deal. I'm told that they can sign on anytime after that until Congress ratifies the agreement. By law, Congress gets 90 days to look it over. The earliest this could be ratified would be the end of November. Still, the president's team claiming victory that his trade policies work. And this agreement covers not just autos, but also textiles, information communication and technology, medical devices, digital trade like e-books, and agriculture. Now, for example, in agriculture, the tariff for Mexico and the U.S. will remain at 0. It will include language that protects intellectual property for both sides in the new field of gene editing of plants. Now, one of the big ones that everyone's talking about is autos. In the agreement, 75% of a car will have to be made in the U.S. or Mexico to fall under reduced tariffs. 40 to 45% of an auto will have to be made by workers making $16 an hour or more. And all of the steel and aluminum used in a car will have to come from the region that car is assembled.
We've changed the way we calculate things. We've made it cleaner and easier, and we're going to have much more regional content in these cars and much more, essentially, U.S. content in these cars. So we've created a situation where there's more U.S. jobs, but there also will be more Mexican jobs. So it's a big, big win for manufacturers. It's a big win for agriculture. We've cleaned out a lot of the barriers to trade.
And the U.S. Trade Representative says that farmers, he mentioned agriculture, are foremost on the president's mind. He believes this agreement with Mexico will help them, even if Canada does not sign on. Shannon.
Okay, well, you said the clock is ticking. Yeah. Canada is heading here, the representatives, to talk about this, but we've got a Friday deadline for a lot of this.
Exactly. If they want to be part of that original deal, and that's the important part, the administration believes that they need to have a trade agreement with Mexico, and they believe that Canada has to go through the United States to get one, literally. Still, a Canadian spokesman for the foreign minister says that we will only sign a new NAFTA deal that is good for Canada and good for the middle class. Now, Canada's signature is required, is what they're saying, but the fact is that they're flying down tomorrow, and the president said that he will start the process to terminate NAFTA, again calling this the United States-Mexico agreement, and he is fine with bilateral deals. That's the issue.
Yeah, he certainly is, and we know that you have been everywhere chasing folks down, trying to get information and scoop on this, so let us know what you hear from Canada.
Exactly. Yeah, I will, as soon as that happens. In fact, tomorrow, we may have news by the end of the week. The U.S. administration believes that Canada has to sign on to this. Mm-hmm. They believe they're almost forced to with their auto industry.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll be standing by for your reports. Thanks. All right. A big day on Wall Street as word of the new trade deal between the U.S. and Mexico sent the market soaring. As Edward said, the Dow surged almost 260 points. The S&P 500 was up 22. The NASDAQ finished ahead 72. And those last two, by the way, are record highs. Our next guest has plenty to say about the prospects for the Trump administration's new trade deal with Mexico and the legacy of Senator John McCain. Senate GOP Conference Chairman, Republican Senator from South Dakota, John Thune, joins us now to weigh in. Senator, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Shannon, nice to be with you.
Okay, so let's start where we are today with what we know about this deal with Mexico. We know it doesn't involve Canada at this point. You say you're encouraged, but as always, the details matter.
Sure, the details do matter, but what we're seeing is encouraging, and one of the things coming from a farm state, we rely heavily on trade. I mean, we've got to export to survive, and so we've been watching as this thing emerges very carefully, the particulars of it. And it looks like, and what we've said all along on ag at least, is do no harm. And I think on this agreement, from what I've seen so far, we're encouraged by what we're seeing. But I think there are a couple of key areas that our members were concerned about. One was the sunset. The other had to do with rules of origin. And it seems like at least the administration has listened to those concerns and has tried as best they can to address them. And I think that it's a good start. We'll see, obviously, when they get fill in all the details. But yeah, we feel good about where it is.
Okay, so one of your GOP colleagues in the Senate, Senator Ben Sasse, also a heavy ag state for him, he says there's reason to worry that this might be a step backward from NAFTA for American families, especially on fundamental issues of presumed expiration of the deal, which you mentioned, and empowering government bureaucrats rather than markets to determine the components in cars and other goods. What would worry you about this? Because Congress is going to have a role.
They are. I mean, ultimately, we'll have to vote to approve it. We'll get it up or down at some point, an opportunity to vote on it. But I would say that for Republicans, those will be the two key issues, the ones that you mentioned, the ones that Senator Sass identified. But so how they, you know, in the end, fine-tune that provision that deals with sunset. And originally, they had like a 5-year sunset, which everybody would have said, no way. And I think that they have moved away from that. There's like a 6-year review in it now. And then also on rules of origin, which was the other issue. I think those are the 2 points that there's probably going to be the most contention about. And so as we work through this, our members are going to want to obviously weigh in as they get the finer points put together.
What do you make about the president calling this the U.S.-Mexico trade agreement? He's not calling it NAFTA, but a lot of folks are saying, listen, if you're going to do this and you're going to add Canada. And by the way, one of the former Canadian trade negotiators, Larry Herman, said today, I think it's appalling that Canada has been kept at arm's length from these talks over the past number of weeks. There's no way a NAFTA agreement can be reached for signature by the end of this month. It's not going to happen. Now, tonight we got late word from the White House that says the president spoke with Prime Minister Trudeau today. They talked about U.S.-Canada trade and agreed to continue their conversations.
Well, and it sounds like the Canadians are starting to engage, and I think that's what the administration's been hoping would happen, because at least at this point it has been sort of a bilateral discussion between the U.S. and Mexico. And I think the fact that Canada is now feeling pressured is probably a good thing, because we need them at the table. It should be it'd be nice to make it a North American agreement, whether it's called NAFTA. And I'm guessing the president will call it something else because he likes
U.S.-Mexico-Canada.
He's got his own branding.
Trade agreement.
Right.
Well, we'll see. I want to ask you too on another topic, but about Iran flexing its muscles of the Strait of Hormuz. The Secretary of State says today they don't control it. It's an international waterway. Do you have concerns?
Right. Of course we do, and we watch very carefully what happens in Iran. And obviously, us having the president withdrawing from the Iranian nuclear deal is something that I think has put additional pressure on Iran, and as they try to navigate now in this new world where they've got sanctions snapped back into place from the U.S. and seeing what our European allies are going to do in the end on this. But there needs to be maximum pressure on Iran, and obviously when they flex their muscles like that, they do it because they needed to do that for internal consumption.
Well, and they've taken us to court as well. That's a whole other segment we'll be talking about.
Right.
But I noticed that you have on some special cufflinks today.
Yeah.
And I know that your family and that you obviously have had special connections with the McCains over the years.
Well, when I got to the Senate in January 2005, I immediately got on the Armed Services Committee, and I got an opportunity to travel a number of times with Senator McCain. And it wasn't until I read his book, Faith of My Fathers, and I looked at some of these places and times and how they sort of synced up with my dad's experience in World War II. And sure enough, my dad, who received the Distinguished Flying Cross as a naval aviator during World War II, had his DFC signed by Admiral John McCain, Senator McCain's grandfather. So when we found that out, there was kind of a bond that developed there, and he was terrific about every time he'd see me, he's, let's call your dad, we got to call your dad. But he was that way. He took a real personal interest in people, tried to develop and mentor young people as we came in, and so having the opportunity not only to travel abroad with him, but also travel the entire state of Iowa when he was running for president and other places around the country was a real experience, because he was a uniquely gifted individual with so much passion, and who really did believe profoundly that you want to serve causes that are greater than yourself.
And by the way, these say McCain 2008, is it?
Yeah, I think that's right. These were presidential from that election, and I wish you'd have won.
A lot of memories. All right. Senator, thank you for coming in tonight.
Nice to be with you. Thanks, Shannon. You bet.
Well, for the second time this year, a federal court in North Carolina has ruled the state's congressional districts must be redrawn, this time suggesting that November's election involving several key House seats may have to be postponed. The 3-judge panel found the Democrats who challenged North Carolina's congressional map had standing to do so under the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. Our senior Capitol Hill producer Chad Pergram says tonight that ruling could turn the fight for control of the House on its head. Well, tomorrow, longtime Justice Department official Bruce Ohr is expected to testify before Congress. The deposition will focus on Ohr's decision to share information with the FBI from the former British spy Christopher Steele after Steele was fired by the FBI as a source. Investigators tell Fox they also question whether the FBI knew about Steele's hatred of then-candidate Trump. By the way, Congressman Jim Jordan will be questioning Ohr tomorrow. Then he joins us afterwards, so be sure to tune in. Exclusively Jim Jordan with us on Fox News at Night, Tuesday night. Michael Cohen's lawyer throwing around serious accusations linking the president and potential Russian collusion. But now it turns out there were some omissions, maybe corrections. We've got new developments tonight on how this story has taken quite a turn.
Michael Cohen does not have information that President Trump knew about the Trump Tower meeting with the Russians beforehand or even after.
Does not.
Plus, confirmation hearings for Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh kick off next week, and you might not believe. New tonight, a slew of recent comments by Michael Cohen's lawyer about President Trump's supposed awareness of Russian efforts to interfere in the 2016 election being called into question, as it turns out they may not be entirely true. Trace Gallagher's on the case for us tonight. Good evening, Trace.
Good evening, Shannon. After President Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, accepted a plea deal last week, admitting, among other things, to making illegal campaign contributions, Cohen's attorney, Lanny Davis, was all over the media touting a bombshell, saying Michael Cohen was prepared to tell Robert Mueller's special counsel that President Trump had advanced knowledge of a 2016 Trump Tower meeting where the Russians were expected to offer dirt on Hillary Clinton. Watch Davis extremely confident last Tuesday, not so confident on Wednesday. Watch.
Mr. Cohen has knowledge on certain subjects that should be of interest to the special counsel and is more than happy to tell the special counsel all that he knows.
So Michael Cohen does not have information that President Trump knew about the Trump Tower meeting with the Russians beforehand or even after?
Does not.
And by today, Davis was in full mea culpa, quoting, "I should have been much clearer that I could not confirm the story on the Trump Tower meeting. I take the responsibility for not communicating more clearly my uncertainty. I regret the error." Remember, late last month, both CNN and the Washington Post, citing unnamed sources, reported that Michael Cohen witnessed Donald Trump being informed about the Trump Tower meeting and also witnessed Trump give his approval. The Washington Post has now updated its story, naming Lanny Davis as its source, but CNN is standing by its story, saying they are confident in the reporting, which might surprise the Senate Intelligence Committee, who interviewed Cohen extensively about Russian interference in the campaign. But those familiar with Cohen's testimony reportedly say he had no information about the Trump Tower meeting. The president certainly wasn't letting Lanny Davis walk back without notice, tweeting, quote, "The answer is that I did not know about the meeting, just another phony story by the fake news media." Lanny Davis also indicated that Michael Cohen had information that Donald Trump also knew about Russians hacking Democratic emails. Now Davis isn't so sure about that one either. Shannon.
Yeah, I think his quote is, "I'm not sure." Trace Gallagher, thank you very much. For more now, Fox News contributors Jessica Tarlov and Charlie Hurt are here to weigh in. Jessica, I'll start with you. These are not minor points to stumble over.
No, they definitely are, and especially judging by how excited everyone on my side of the aisle got when we heard that Michael Cohen had knowledge that President Trump knew about the Trump Tower meeting and had given the sign-off here. I think it's going to become increasingly difficult for CNN to continue to dig in their heels on this one, especially with the retraction of the Washington Post, and I believe the New York Post as well has updated their story. We'll see what goes on. President Trump is going to call them fake news no matter what, but best to not add fodder to that claim. Get your story straight, and so we can move on to what Michael Cohen will say tomorrow.
Well, and here's the thing, is that Michael Cohen now, as a witness, this comes into play because if Lanny Davis is getting this from his client, Michael Cohen, then that raises all kinds of other questions. The Washington Post, Aaron Blake, writing this: "It's damaging to Cohen's credibility. Davis is his lawyer and spokesman after all, which means these claims effectively came from Cohen himself. Cohen wasn't a fantastic witness before. He's a worse one now." Charlie's been laughing since we started this segment. I guess we should let him talk.
It's true. It's true. He isn't even, unbelievably, he's actually a worse witness now than he was before. But, you know, last week, it was a rough week for Donald Trump derangement syndrome sufferers. You know, you had the verdict in the Manafort trial, the conviction in the Manafort trial, and then you had the guilty plea with Michael Cohen. And everybody went into absolute hyper overdrive hysterics, thinking that this was all going to lead directly to the impeachment of Donald Trump. But when you clear away all the underbrush, you find out that, well, the Manafort trial had nothing to do with Donald Trump, and the Michael Cohen stuff is at best pretty troubling. The accusations leveled by a troubling witness, and the idea that Michael Cohen knows what FEC laws are and which ones, what campaign finance laws the president violated. If he's proven nothing, he's proven he's not a very good lawyer. So, a week later, it looks a whole lot different than it did last week.
Jessica, does it feel different to you?
It feels a little different, but not quite as different as it does for Charlie over there. I personally don't think that I suffer from this Trump derangement syndrome, though everyone on Twitter seems to think that I do. I do think that last week was a big deal. I know that the president's approval rating is unchanged in the NBC News Wall Street Journal poll that came out.
Does that surprise you at all? Jessica?
It doesn't surprise me because I've learned in a post-Charlottesville world to be surprised about nothing in terms of the approval rating.
Just about anything in general. Inside the Beltway, no longer surprised about anything.
Right, but what I do find interesting is when you look at the trends, for instance, in the Fox News poll about the generic ballot going into the midterms, or how the issues are playing out, that the President Trump is now only favored on managing the economy, but falling underwater in health care, national security, et cetera. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking at. His personal approval rating, I mean, his base certainly is into him. I think the Gorsuch voters are still into him, and we're going to talk about the Kavanaugh nomination.
Let's do that. I want to get to that. Brian Fallon, obviously linked with Hillary Clinton. Demand for Justice is where he is at now. He's former press secretary for Clinton. He says the fight against Brett Kavanaugh, these hearings start next week, is winnable, but only if Senate Democrats quickly unite in opposition so we can focus on pressuring a Republican to break ranks. At this point, it's absurd that there are still more than 24 Democrats on the fence about Kavanaugh. He's the most unpopular Supreme Court nominee in 35 years, and it's time to fight his nomination with the urgency it deserves. Charlie, I got to say, though, on the unpopularity question, 99% of people outside the Beltway have no idea who Brett Kavanaugh is if you say that name. So I don't put too much stock in that.
Yeah, and any of these polls are kind of, I'm very suspicious of any of them anyway, especially when they delve into something as sort of arcane as this. But, I think that the Democrats are going to have a hard time at this point mounting a very good opposition to him, as Fallon himself noted. If you have half of your own party sort of on the fence about him, then that means that they haven't really made the case that he's as bad as some people claim that he is. And then, of course, on top of that, for 30, 40 years now, Democrats have played this game, judicial nomination fight game, by claiming that people will die if a certain judge gets on the bench. And after 30, 40 years, and they've been very successful at it with a lot of nominees, starting with Robert Bork. But my goodness, at some point, people get tired of that argument because it's absurd on its face. And so, I think that's all of that explains why they're having the trouble.
We got to leave it there because we're out of time. But listen, the hearings kick off next Tuesday. Come back and talk to us about that, because then we'll have some actual statements and information from the nominee himself that we can debate. Jessica and Charlie.
Thanks a lot, Shannon.
Thank you very much, Charlie. All right, who will replace John McCain in the Senate? We've got a live report from Arizona on who may top the list after the passing of the longtime senator and war hero.
In more than 30 years as a senator, he never failed to marshal a razor-sharp wit, a big heart, and, of course, a fiery spirit.
Plus, we're learning more about the suspect in the deadly shooting at a Florida video game tournament and the political potential impact of that tragedy. Tonight, Senator McCain's death is overshadowing some hotly contested primary races in Arizona. And while his seat is not on the ballot tomorrow, that's not stopping all the talk about who may succeed him. Correspondent Peter Doocy is live in Tempe tonight with the next political steps. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Shannon. A conservative candidate is cleaning up comments that she made where she seemed to blame or accuse the McCain family of trying to spite her with the timing that they picked when they decided to announce that he was going to end cancer treatments. Dr. Kelly Ward wrote a few days ago on Facebook, "I think they wanted to have a particular narrative that they hope is negative to me." And Ward apologized tonight, even though she's accusing the media of pushing a false narrative.
I do understand how many could have misconstrued my comments as insensitive, and for this, I apologize. But again, the intention of my comments were in no way directed at Senator McCain or his family.
Other Republican primary candidates are trying to capitalize on the blunder. Sheriff Joe Arpaio tweeted this: Dr. Kelly Ward once again uses a tragedy as an excuse to praise herself. Her press conference today was shameful and clearly shows that she will always skirt the real issues in order to con voters into supporting her. Arpaio is famous for making inmates wear pink underwear and live in a tent city. He was also convicted of criminal contempt and later pardoned by President Trump. The president didn't endorse anyone in this contest, but Arpaio doesn't think he needs it.
This is my eighth Republican primary. I never lost a Republican primary. But everybody will come to my office running for president. I have the records, all want my endorsement, the governors. I don't ask for endorsement. My endorsement comes from the people.
The Secretary of State's office tells us that a majority of ballots have already been cast ahead of Election Day, and recent polls point to the frontrunner being Congresswoman Martha McSally, who is already turning her attention from Republican opponents to the likely Democratic primary winner, Congresswoman Kyrsten Sinema.
I know the price of freedom. While we were in harm's way in uniform, Kyrsten Sinema was protesting us in a pink tutu and denigrating our service.
So those three candidates are all competing to replace the retiring Senator Jeff Flake, and they will serve alongside whoever is named to replace the recently passed Senator John McCain, whose successor will be announced after his funeral. A McCain family rep today would not touch rumors that Cindy McCain might be interested in the job, but this representative for the McCains did say that he thought if McCain got to pick, he would want a Hispanic woman. Shannon?
All right, we'll stand by for that, and we'll check in with you for coverage of all of those primaries tomorrow in Arizona. Peter Doocy, thank you. Tomorrow, voters head to polls in Arizona, Oklahoma, and Florida for some of the most anticipated primary elections. But there is one big issue looming large in the Sunshine State tonight, that shooting at a waterfront mall in Jacksonville over the weekend. Well, tonight we are learning new details about the suspect. Senior correspondent Rick Leventhal is live for us tonight in Florida. Good evening, Rick.
Good evening, Shannon. The details include that the shooter was hospitalized twice for mental illness and prescribed medications for psychiatric disorders, but authorities say there's no indication that the shooting was pre-planned, even though the gunman, David Katz, just bought his weapons earlier this month legally from a licensed gun dealer in Baltimore. Authorities say video surveillance confirms that Katz left the contest in a pizza restaurant after losing in a Madden 19 video game qualifying tournament and returned minutes later with 2 guns, extra ammo, and a laser sight. He only used one of those weapons, passing customers to target players, shooting 12, killing 2, and then turning his gun on himself. The 2 killed Taylor Robertson, 28, and Elijah Clayton, 22, both gamers who also both played high school football. The FBI has searched Katz's father's home in Baltimore, where Katz lived. They also searched Katz's car and hotel room here in Jacksonville. Authorities say both parents, who are now divorced, are cooperating with investigators. Now, Shannon, as you mentioned, the Florida primary is here tomorrow. A number of candidates canceled campaign events here in the Jacksonville area, but Senator Bill Nelson was here, and so was Governor Rick Scott, who is challenging Nelson for his seat this fall.
The first thing people want to do is make it all political. I think what we need to be thinking about is we need to be thinking about each of these families.
What I've advocated all along is just use some common sense. Pass a comprehensive universal background check law. It would have caught Omar Mateen, who had been on the terrorist watch list. It might have caught the shooter down in the school in Parkland because he had so many mental problems.
Tonight, EA Sports announced it's canceling its remaining 3 qualifying Madden tournaments while it reviews security protocol. And here at Jacksonville Landing, we just watched police pull down the remaining crime scene tape. It's scheduled to reopen tomorrow. Shannon?
Rick Leventhal there on the scene for us in Florida. Thank you very much. America's top diplomat, Secretary Mike Pompeo, firing back at Iran over claims that that country has taken control of a major shipping route where nearly a third of the world's sea-traded oil passes through daily. The Secretary of State says, quote, the Islamic Republic of Iran does not control the Strait of Hormuz. The strait is an international waterway. The United States will continue to work with our partners to ensure freedom of navigation and free flow of commerce in international waterways. Also today, Iran went to court over renewed U.S. sanctions. Foreign correspondent Benjamin Hall breaks down what it means for us tonight.
Iran is suffering under sanctions, and today they pushed back by trying to sue the US at the UN, claiming the sanctions violate a little-known 1955 friendship treaty.
The United States is publicly propagating a policy intended to damage, as severely as possible, Iran's economy and Iranians' nationals and companies.
Secretary Pompeo responded in a statement, saying that Iran's claims were meritless and that the US would vigorously defend against them. Just as Iran was quoting a friendship treaty, the head of its navy was issuing military threats, saying it now has full control of the Persian Gulf and Straits of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil goes, adding that Iran could take military action to block oil exports. But inside Iran, cracks are showing. On Sunday, the finance minister, a key ally of President Rouhani, was voted out due to the country's economic woes, which he also blamed on the US.
The enemy has targeted our entire economic fortifications. By imposing sanctions, America is seeking to put our people under pressure and stir dissatisfaction.
Whole industries are now collapsing. Rug exports, for example, once a major source of income, are in free fall.
America has been the best market for us, in my opinion, the best market in history. It's a huge loss. We could have revived this industry, but we lost the chance.
Now, with the Iranian rial already at half the value it was at the start of the year, voices of dissent are growing. And in particular, people fear November, which is when the next round of sanctions will hit oil exports, that observers say could lead to a total collapse of the economy. Shannon?
Benjamin Hall, thank you. Well, as the president gets caught up in talk of hush money for a porn star and a Playboy bunny, top evangelicals gathered with him. And the first, like a state dinner. That's what participants are saying about the scene at the White House tonight. But the president was not honoring foreign dignitaries. The focus was on evangelical leaders. As we mentioned earlier, the president made some news there tonight saying he appreciates the work of Senator John McCain. But that's not all he had to say. Pastor of First Baptist Dallas, Dr. Robert Jeffress, the Fox News contributor, was there. He joins us tonight live in Washington. Good to have you on set with us tonight.
Good to be here in person, Shannon.
Okay, so tell us about this dinner. I understand the president talked about your support, evangelical support of him, and what he's tried to do in return.
Well, he did. And, you know, I guess the headline from the evening would be evangelicals remain enthusiastically supportive of President Trump. And, you know, the headlines that we've all seen recently, I knew they wouldn't affect my support of the president, but I did wonder how it might affect some others in the room. Well, the answer is there's no effect. I mean, this was a beautiful state dinner organized by the First Lady, but it almost turned into a campaign rally. I mean, leader after leader stood up and spontaneously started talking about why they supported President Trump. And Shannon, I know a lot of people are still perplexed. Why are Christians so supportive of Donald Trump? Well, it's really not that hard to figure out when you realize he is the most pro-life, pro-religious liberty, pro-conservative judiciary in history, and that includes either Bush or Ronald Reagan. I think that's why evangelicals remain committed to this president, and they're not going to turn away from him soon.
Yeah, I mean, August polling that we have just, you know, within days, it said, do you approve or disapprove of the job Donald Trump is doing as president? White evangelicals said this, approve 74%, 25% disapprove, don't know, 2%. That is a resounding yes from that particular group, but you do understand the questioning, the criticism from people who say this is not what you would ever do as a leader of your church. You would preach against much of what the president's done in his life. Is that a fair trade-off for you then on the judges, on the issue of abortion and those other things?
Well, first of all, Shannon, to be fair, we have to understand these are still allegations against the president. So I'm not going to judge the president on these things. But even if they were true, some of these allegations, I mean, obviously we don't support extramarital affairs. We don't support hush money payments. But what we do support are these president's excellent policies. And I think most thinking people can absolutely differentiate between the two. And don't mistake what's going on here. Those who hate President Trump, those on the left, know that if they can dislodge his evangelical supporters from him, they have a shot at overtaking the White House. And so I think the left is trying to shame people like myself continuously for supporting this great president. It's not going to work. We're not going to turn away from him.
I want to read part of something commenting on Salon.com and give you a chance to respond. They said that there's a double standard where straight white men can do whatever they like and everyone else must face a stern crackdown on sin. It's long been baked into the religious rights ideology. It goes on from there.
Well, I think it's absolutely wrong. I preach about sin every Sunday, and I haven't changed my convictions at all. But you know, it's interesting. The president tonight at the dinner, he quoted me. He said, you know, Pastor Jeffress often says Donald Trump isn't a perfect Christian, but he's a pretty good leader. And that's true. I've said that. The fact is, Shannon, none of us is perfect. The whole basis of the Christian message is we're all sinners in need of a Savior. And the good news is anyone who asks for forgiveness can receive it.
Well, the president said in the past that he hasn't asked for forgiveness. Have you had conversations with him to see where you think his heart is on these kinds of issues?
You know, I've known President Trump for now 3 years, and I consider him a great friend. We were together in the Oval Office this afternoon, but I made a deal with the president early on when we became friends and he wasn't president. I said, you know, when Mr. Trump at that time, I said, when people ask me about your faith, what should I say? He said, Robert, you can tell people my faith is very important to me, but it's also very personal with me. So I never go beyond that in talking about it.
All right, well, you make a good point that we are all in need of forgiveness at some point, and for me, every day. Pastor Jeffress, thank you for joining us. Good to see you tonight.
Thanks, Shannon.
All right, tonight, the left is claiming that allegations Pope Francis knew about abuse and did nothing should be treated with skepticism, they say, because of the source of the claims. A longtime Catholic conservative critic will investigate and give you the facts next. Prosecutors in New Mexico produced new evidence as they seek to keep suspects jailed on child abuse charges. That story tops our Real News Roundup. New Mexico prosecutors say they've seized a document called Phases of a Terrorist Attack at the House of Horrors, where 11 children were reportedly found starving and living in filth. According to court documents, the suspects had singled out an Atlanta hospital as a potential target. Officials at Muskogee High School in Oklahoma are reportedly enforcing a state law that would allow the school to fine students up to $250 for missing classes repeatedly without an excused absence. The law also provides a penalty of imprisonment for up to 15 days. And parents of a North Carolina fifth grader say their child was punished for referring to his teacher as ma'am. Check this out. The boy's parents say they raised him to use sir and ma'am as a sign of respect. Their request to have him moved to a different teacher has been approved. Well, tonight, some on the left are calling it a coup attempt against Pope Francis by a longtime conservative critic, the former Vatican ambassador to the U.S. Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano enraged papal supporters years ago by arranging a meeting with a Kentucky clerk who'd refused to sign off on same-sex marriages. Vigano reportedly lost his job because of that meeting. Tonight, the Archbishop is calling on the Pope to resign, claiming the pontiff knew about sexual allegations of misconduct by an American priest, but did nothing. Correspondent Brian Yedis has the report on the Archbishop's claims.
Read the document carefully and judge it for yourselves. I will not say one word on this. I think the statement speaks for itself.
Aboard the papal plane on Sunday, returning from his trip to Ireland, Pope Francis neither confirmed nor denied allegations that he failed to act against a known sexual abuser. In an 11-page letter written by former Archbishop and Vatican ambassador to the U.S., Carlo Maria Vigano, Vigano claims the Pope knew about sexual abuse allegations against American Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, the former Archbishop of Washington, D.C.